name is CHISOM Okafo. I was born in 1993. I am a clinical nutritionist. I am a dietitian as well. And I also do a lot of poetry. I write poetry. I write essays from time to time, and I do a lot of editing by the side. I graduated from the University of Nigeria in Nsukka in 2016, and I actually studied human nutrition and dietetics at the University of Nigeria in Nsukka. And afterwards, I served at the City Nigerian American Hospital as a dietitian in Lagos, and I have been practicing clinical nutrition and dietetics ever since till now. I grew up with three siblings, and I was the second in the house. I was second out of four siblings, and I grew up as a shy, timid, person. I wasn't playing with the others. I was doing a lot of writing, a lot of reading rather, because I started reading before I ever ventured into writing. So I was doing a lot of reading. Back in the days, my mom would buy me books, poetry books. I remember reading Maman Vatsa, the late Major General Maman Vatsa's book of poems. And I remember reading particularly Stinger the Scorpion about Gordon Barracks and the rest. So I grew up reading a lot of books. And then later on, my brother would get books from his school. He was like 3 years ahead of me. I was the second, he was the first. And so he would get books, and I would read a lot of books. And then he would borrow books from the school library, and I would read and ask him to borrow more and more and more. And I was doing a lot of reading back there. And basically, I wasn't someone that was let's say, playful and always outgoing. No, I was reticent. I was alone. Yeah. I think I came to writing from a place of reading. I was always reading. And so I was drawing up pictures and making up things on my mind. And then afterwards, the writing just came naturally. But then I wrote my first poem when I was in JSS3, and that was when we had a competition. There was this school magazine. There was this proper back in the days. I also served as an English teacher that asked us to make contributions to the school magazine, and I sent in poems, and we had very high praise for it, and that was how I just started writing. And then I can remember that afterwards I was awarded the Shakespearean prize. That was the first time I heard about prizes for my writing, and that was basically my first push into writing and into literature, as it were. And afterwards, I would write and send out to magazines and to online outlets, and I would also keep reading and keep pushing. But those events were basically the major events that gave me that push. And then during my university days, I chanced upon, because it was just by accident, I chanced upon a group of young writers, young readers that came together to read and to share literary works. And among them were Arinze Ifeakandu, Otosirieze Obiyoung, Ebenezer Ago, who later did a lot of work with me at 2035 Africa Anthology. Among them were Michael Chinecherem Obo, so many of them, and just so many writers back in the day. And we would come together, we would read, we would share poetry and prose and whatever we could lay our hands on. We would give ourselves writing tasks, then we would meet every Saturday to write. And those events were actually what introduced me properly to the world of writing and to the world of literature. And then in 2016, I was second runner-up for the Nigerian Students' Poetry Prize, and I realized that writing could give me money from time to time. And so it was also a very big sort of encouragement. I was basically reading as a child and as a young adult. I was basically reading the oldies, what you could call the oldies, the Chinua Achebes, the Wole Soyinkas, Ama Ata Aidos and JK, sorry, a lot of old, a lot of second and third generation of writers. But then the one book that remained with me when I first read it was Maman Vatsa's Tinga the Scorpion. I would never forget that book because it was my first introduction into poetry, in as much as that was children's literature, but it introduced me into the numerous possibilities of poetry and of literature. I mean, I was seeing Dodan Barracks, I was seeing a child, I was seeing scorpions, I was seeing children playing, and in fact, the first thing I did afterwards when I relocated to Lagos for my youth service was to visit Dodan Barracks and to see what Maman Vasta saw when he was writing Stinger the Scorpion. I mean, it was my first introduction into writing, and I'm forever grateful to Maman Vasta. And I also was encouraged and was highly motivated by Chinua Achebe's books. Of course, almost every young Nigerian was encouraged by Chinua Achebe's books. But then, in a very special way, because I read this book over time, and each time I read Chinua Achebe's book, I got new insights. You know, it was like more and more dimensions of the book, of the story, of Okonkwo's life. Okonkwo's story was opening up to me each time I read Chinua Achebe's book. So Chinua Achebe, Maman Vatsa, and then the poets, Ben Okri, amazing poets, and Chimamanda, and then those that write right now. Itola Jones once gifted me a book called a book by Louis Glick. Louis Glick would later go on to win the Nobel Prize for Literature, and the first poem. The Wild Iris, actually, the first poem started with the lines that I would never forget. At the end of my suffering, there was a door. Hear me out. At the end of my suffering, there was a door. I would never forget that. A door at the end of my suffering. So, there are writers that you read and you'd never remain the same. And these are some of the people. But then it will be very difficult for me to point out my very favorite people, because it's like someone that have done things that has been reading over time, and then it becomes difficult to know the people that have specifically touched you, because almost everybody that you've read have touched you in one way or the other. Yeah. I have also been enamored by the poetry of African poets. For instance, Famidors, a very amazing person and an even more amazing writer, and and also the poetry of Chris Abani. In fact, there was a time I spent long moments, long days, long months just studying the poetry of Chris Abani, and also a lot of writers of African heritage, and particularly the writers published by the African Poetry Book Fund, which is run by Chris Abani and Famidors and the others. And I also love the poetry of Carl Phillips. Carl Phillips has been in very major ways giving another light to the light I already have, the light with which I see poems and poetry. I mean, very short and direct poems. And also Rainer Maria Rilke. I've always loved Rainer, and I've always loved Sharon Oates. I've always loved Sharon Oates as well. So there are just so many of them. I just can't mention everybody right now. So writing does not come easy to me. It's a rigorous process. I have to agonize and do a lot of work for me to be able to get something done. But then I am always happy when the writing is done, and just seeing that I am able to produce an amazing work of art. In fact, I feel that with each work I produce is my best work until I produce the next work, and then I start feeling that this is my best work. And then when you ask me about my best work, I would have to tell you that you should wait till you see the next one. But then writing does not come easy to me, and it's like a long road. It's like I'm traveling on a long road with so many turns, so many bends, and there is a lot of air. I mean, I like to see myself on a long road when I think about my writing, and then I think about birds, some dust batting on this road, and then I don't know what is at the next bend, right? I just don't know. I would have to get there for me to find out. That's just how writing is. It comes with so many uncertainties for me, and I keep journeying anyway. I keep going through that long road because I'm always curious. I'm just like a gambler. I would like to make the next bet. I wouldn't want to go home just yet. I wouldn't want to rest just yet. And that's how the curiosity in writing comes to me. I mean, I want to see what the next work would be like, what the next poetry would be like. And that's basically how writing comes to me. And my works have been exploring love in all of its form before now. But then, in about 2 years ago or 3 years ago, I was diagnosed of a ventricular dysfunction, a heart dysfunction, and my work started gravitating towards the poetry of embodiment. I started imagining life through the lens of the clinically ill, or the chronically ill, the physically ill or physically disabled, the neurodivergent, and the mentally ill. I started trying to look at poetry from the point of view of the embodied and embodiment in all of its form. And that is basically what my poetry right now speaks to. And in fact, 2 years ago, I was shortlisted for the Sillerman First Book Prize, my first poetry manuscript. And then last year, my other poetry manuscript was also shortlisted for the Sillerman First Book Prize. But the most amazing thing about this is that the second poetry manuscript explores what the poetry that I have written when I was in the most severe state of agony. I mean, you're just diagnosed of something that you were not expecting to be diagnosed with, and so it becomes a problem. And a way of response to my diagnosis and everything was poetry. I was writing as a way of finding some sort of companionship of loss. Not just to get over loss or to get over pain, but to find some companionship in loss. And that is what has driven my poetry over these last couple of years, and what still probably drives my poetry now, even though I should be thinking about other things, I suppose, but this is probably what I am engaged with. Well, I always try to find a balance between the life of a nutritionist and the life of a poet, which are, by the way, two very different lives. There are two lives at the various ends of the spectrum. I was speaking with a very brilliant poet, Daisy, who I also admire, and who is a microbiologist and also a poet. And I came to realize that poets who approach poetry as outsiders, let's say from science background, they always have some sort of hustle between balancing out things. But then one thing that is beautiful and that has helped me has been that I have been able to focus on one thing at a time. I've realized that the most important moment in everybody's life is not really the future, it is the present. And if we are able to handle the present so beautifully. We could actually do anything. And so I make out time for my writing. I make out time for seeing patients. And in fact, even though these things are on two very, very, very different sides, very different ends of the spectrum, I I find a way to link these things because my experiences, my journey. So I find a way to strike a balance between my professional life and my writing life, and that's just it. And then the work I've been doing in the hospital has actually given me that opportunity to hear people's stories, to journey with people, and to become part of their own lives. I mean, I have had opportunities to talk to soldiers wounded from insurgency and so on and so forth, and I've become a part of their journeys too. And these things are also part of my work of embodiment. And so you now realize that there is this intersection too between my own poetry and also my own profession. And then I also count my time in moments, because I think it was Rembrandt Tagore, the Indian writer also, that said that if we count our times in moments and not in minutes, we would have time enough, like the butterfly. And that is just what I do too. And so I find a lot of intersections between the two by keeping one aside from it or from the other, and also by intersecting one from with the other as well. You know, I just figure out ways to do these things, and they have worked for me so far. Echocardiogram was among my suite of poems published last year on Isele magazine, and it was also nominated for the Isele Prize for poetry last year, and it was also among the poems I submitted for the Brunel Prize last year, which also was nominated for the Brunel Prize. And what actually made me write these poems were, the days where I was newly diagnosed with this ventricular dysfunction, and I had long moments of solitude. I would enter into a university around my place of work, and I would sit there, watch people play football, and think, and then write afterwards. And then I would also read Carl Phillips and the poets that give me that connection to poetry, that easy access to poetry. Carl Phillips, Chris Abani, J.K. Anowe, Ocean Vong, and then these people actually did a lot of reshaping of how I saw grief and how I handled grief. And so echocardiogram came from a place of solitude, but also came as a way of seeking, crying out for companionship. Even though I know that there may be no clear solution to what I was going through at the time, but then there was some sort of companionship in loss, and this is actually the enduring power of poetry. The fact that you could get friendship with your words, and that you know that you're writing to reach out to someone that will, at some point in their lives, also pass through what you're passing through, and get some sort of companionship with in your works. And this actually inspired echocardiogram. Well, awards basically mean nothing to me. And basically they mean nothing to me, absolutely nothing. The reward for poetry, for writing poems, is not in being awarded for your poems, right? It's not in getting agency for your poems. I mean, getting agency is perfect, it's beautiful, but then it's just not there, because nothing is promised. Commodores would tell me that nothing is ever promised in poetry, but then nevertheless, I also submit my poems for consideration. I have been nominated for several of them: the Brunel Prize, the Sillerman First Book Prize, the Gerard Crack Prize, the Jack Grips Poetry Award, and just so many of them. But then I feel that the ultimate aim
of writing poetry is in finding some sort of comfort with words, and in finding some companionship. I like that word companionship, and I use it a whole lot because that sums up basically why I write. Right, I write because I know that I am crying out to nothing, but to something at the same time, because there are readers who would draw strength over the years from what you have written, and this is a lot of support and the enduring power of poetry and of the arts that we make. Yeah, so I basically don't think awards are what we should judge a good poem by, because most Africans, most Nigerians judge a good poem by the awards, by the prizes that these poems have been able to get. I feel that poetry is not actually the answer to everything, but there are times when a poem is needed, and whenever a poem is needed, a poem is always the only thing that can work, and that's what Commodore says always. But that actually is the truth, which is to also say that an award is not really a true indicator of a good poem and of whether you've written the best poem in the world or whether you have the Nobel Prize or something. But I feel that awards help us give our work some validation, and we need this validation. Poets of African ancestry, of Nigerian ancestry, need this validation, which is why we push our works, apply to places, send our works in for awards and consideration for awards and so on and so forth. But then we should not place all of the importance in literature on awards. That is what I strongly believe. But having said that, I have been nominated for several of them. The Celeb Poetry Prize, the Brunel Prize, the Sillerman First Book Prize, which I actually have been nominated for twice, the Jack Grips Prize, and even 2 postcard prizes, and a Best of the Net too. But then I try not to let these things dictate the flow of my own work. I try not to let the outward engagement with my poems dictate my own work. I just write and send these things out into the world, and I leave people, my readers, to engage these poems in their own way and to navigate my work in the ways that they deem fit. So this is just what I sincerely believe in. Well, I was having a conversation with Rachel Bost about the topic of Nigerian poets and the Nigerianness in the poems of Nigerian poets. Well, I feel that when we talk about agencies, Nigerian poets need agency, and they push out their poems out, to foreign publications and foreign outlets, because this is where they feel the market is. But I also do not feel that there is such a thing as not being Nigerian enough in your poems, because everybody writes what they can relate to on an individual basis. So I feel that I write what I feel I have to write, what I feel prompted, to write about. And you cannot say that I am not being Nigerian enough, or you cannot say that I am not doing Nigerian poetry. No, I feel we should approach each work of art with the uniqueness of each work of art. So they are unique in their own various ways, and we should approach them in that manner. And having said that, I also feel that Nigerian poets should maybe probably publish more in Nigeria, but also should explore other spaces as they deem fit. The opportunities are always endless. So I feel they should explore as much as they can, and not be hindered by the general assumption that they are not sounding Nigerian enough, or they are not sounding African enough, because I just don't feel such a thing as being Nigerian in your poetry actually exists. You're just writing from your own from your own viewpoints, so to speak. You're just writing from your own pains, from your own fears, from your own agonies, and you have a right to be judged, as such. And also I try not to talk about my own poems, because the readers deserve that authority over what I have written. So when I put out something into the world, I leave the readers to make anything out of what I have put out into the world. And so that is how these things work out and work for me. That's how these things work for me. Yeah. When we talk about markets for literature in Nigeria, I do not think that we have a thriving, literary a thriving market for literature in Nigeria, for books, particularly for poetry. In fact, I think prose is even better off in Africa and in Nigeria than poetry. And I feel we need to do a lot of work on this as well. For instance, somebody was telling me about how difficult it always is to get the readers, Nigerian readers, or rather readers in Nigeria, to read poetry collections written by Nigerian writers. He was saying this, and in many ways, I was forced to perfectly agree with what they were saying. So we need to do a lot of work, a whole lot of work. Although there are outlets that are already doing these works, at least from my close work with Libretto, I know that Libretto magazine is doing a beautiful work, and also so many other outlets, Konya, Shansurumi, and so many other outlets are also doing an amazing work. But then we need to do more. For instance, last year during the Nigerian literature, the NLNG Prize for Literature, which Romeo won, we could see that out of the three books that made it to the final stage, was Romeo's book, and then the book by Sadiq Zukogi, and also the book by I'm trying to remember his name now, by Swidi Agema. And you could see that Swidi's book was actually published in Nigeria. Romeo's book was published by Griot's Lounge, and Sadiq's book was published by the African Poetry Book Fund. And so you see that we are beginning to rise up to the occasion, but we need to do more work on this. There are no the market isn't thriving right now, but we could still do more. We could still make these things happen. Literary outlets in Africa and in Nigeria are actually doing a great job. I must say they're doing an amazing work. For instance, Isele magazine is doing beautiful. Okamaka Olisakwe, she has been doing a very beautiful work with Isele. And then there's also Britu Pepper, Ainehi Edoho. There's also so many of them, so many Nigerian outlets and African outlets. And then there's Lonway, Troy Oyango, and the rest, which have gone a very, very long way to make voices from Africa known and heard. In fact, I have had instances where people have contacted me for something just because they have read my work on one of these outlets, African outlets or Nigerian-based outlets. So they're doing beautifully well. But I also feel that in the aspects of works of embodiment, works of disability, the physically disabled poets, we need people that would publish just mentally ill poets, or poets writing on mental illness. We need people that would publish just poets that are writing from their experiences with neurodivergence. Let's say all spectrums of neurodivergence, autism and Down syndrome, and so on and so forth. We need outlets that would set out to just publish poets writing about chronic illness, and probably about the fact that insulin needs to be subsidized, right, for diabetics, or channel blockers, beta blockers, calcium blockers for hypertensives, physically ill people, chronically ill people. So we've not given a voice to these people. But in terms of other aspects of life that people encounter, there are so many representatives of these things, and I think I should give a lot of kudos to outlets from Africa and outlets from Nigeria. Yeah, they're doing an amazing work too. And then also I should talk about the African Poetry Book Fund, run by Kwame Dawes and Chris Abani, and which also has been very phenomenal in the past 10 years or so in pushing the voices from Africa into the global literary scene. We see people like Sadiq Zukod, we see people like Romeo, we see people like Wenga Adeshino and Teresa Lola, who have gone ahead to do so many other things. They all started with the support given to them by the African Poetry Book Fund. And then also I should talk about Bernardine Evaristo of Brunel University and what she has been doing with what she did with the Brunel Prize in the past 10 years, just before it was changed into the Evaristo Prize. So I feel there are a lot of work going on right now, but then as Ariata Oribaba would always say, we have barely scratched the surface. We need to do more and more and more. But this is not to say that that something is not happening already, because things are already happening. And also I should also talk about contemporary poets and how much they are representing our own literary scene in the global stage. You see what Arinze Ifakandu has done with the Dylan Prize. You see what Obiyoung has done, Otosireze with Bretu Pepper, and now with Open Country. You see what Adedayo, Agarau, and your serious collectives, what they are actually doing right now. You see what so many people are doing right now. I was just reading the other day. I was reading the poetry collection of J.K. Anowe, Sky Raining Face, and I just couldn't believe that Nigeria could produce such amazing voices, voices that are thriving in the literary scene right now. And this is just so amazing. We have a very vibrant literary community, and it's an indicator that the future would be so bright. It would be so bright that we would need sunshades to look at it. It would be so bright, absolutely bright. Yeah. So, young writers in Nigeria, in Africa, I feel should write more. But more importantly, they should read more. They should be fearless, and they should be able to take on challenges. And also push your work out, make your voice heard. Because if you don't push your own work out, nobody would hear you. That is just the simple truth. So I feel we need to do a lot of work. We need to do more reading, more writing, apply to MFA programs, and meet other community of writers, and just do more work. Do so much reading and so much writing. There are no limits to what we can achieve as writers, as poets. Many people who started out writing, within the confines of their rooms and without even having any intention of pushing out their works, right now they have been able to do a lot of work and to make a lot of progress just because they were able to take those steps. And so I would like young writers to take bolder steps and be more proactive. And if you can attend literary events, literary festivals, please try to do that. What has helped me in my own journey as a poet, as a poet of witness, as a confessional poet, has been the events, the literary events I've been able to attend. I mean, in just within the past 3, 4, or 5 years, I have been able to meet many people that I have looked up to at the Lagos Literary Festival. I met Kwame Dawes for the first time at the Lagos Literary Festival. I met Kave Akbar. I met Teresa Lola. I met Romeo Oriogun. I met so many of them at the Lagos Literary Festival for the first time, and I started this conversation and communication with them that we still have till today. I mean, so do not be afraid to reach out to writers that you feel should help you. Don't say that these people would ignore you. I saw the work of DM Aderibi where I sent him a message and he replied, and we've been talking ever since. For the past 3 to 4 years, I've been in constant communication with so many of them. So I feel we should be more fearless. We should reach out for opportunities and take them. You know, there are no limits. There are no limits to what we can achieve. There are no limits. You know, I like to think about Barack Obama, who would always use the word, you know, who once said, the audacity of hope. You know, audacity of hope. So there are no limits. There are no limits. We can keep pushing. You know, you don't really arrive. You know, success is a journey. You don't really, you know, you keep going and you keep going and you keep going. Apply to literary competitions. Even if you don't have the money, find, you know, try to, there are those that would require that you don't pay any submission fees for them. You know, you apply to them. And also read 2035 Africa Anthology, because this is, try to also send your work to them, because what they also try to do is to place the work of young writers side by side with their more, you know, established and older counterparts, and in that way you gain more visibility and you gain more readership. Even though visibility shouldn't be, you know, the first concern, right? Readership shouldn't be the first concern. The first concern should be making out something from your own voice, right? Shaping your own voice. It's not just enough to have talent. You have to work towards it, shape it in such a way that when it goes out there, the way you felt it when you're writing should be the way other people would also feel it when they are reading. You know, when you write something that makes you cry, your own work makes you cry. When a reader reads it, it would also make them probably not cry, but also make them feel that connection, you know, that companionship that you have created. And that is what writing is all about. That is just the enduring power of literature and of poetry.